Welcome to Discovering. Back in December, I tagged along with UP trapper Bob Whitens as he put out sets for Bobcat and Fisher. I stopped in at the trapper shed to see the results.
Well, earlier this season we were out doing some fisher trapping and finally managed to pick up a nice male here.
Then cut it, pile it, put it in the woodshed. We all know about Firewood. I talked with MSU Extension Forester Bill Cook to learn more.
Wood, pound for pound, has the same amount of BTUs.
All that and more, so sit back, put your feet up. It's Monday night and time for Discovering.
The secret streams that flow beneath the cliffs of colored stone. Forest thick and healthy with birch and pine and oak, surrounded by the greatest lakes this world has ever known. The black bear's awesome presence as he roams the hills and fields. Call of the timber wolf, the loon's lonesome trill, the eagle soaring high above, the trout lies deep and still. These are what I treasure, the only way I measure feelings that I have for this fine land. There is so much to discover when you're a long-time lover of northern Michigan.
The season for trapping Bobcat and Fisher began back on December 1st with making sets for each.
We want that animal to focus on his bait.
That was followed by the almost daily routine of checking the trap line. Fisher season ended on December 15th and Bobcat runs until February 1st. It's time to check in and find out the results.
Well, earlier this season we were out doing some fisher trapping and finally managed to pick up a nice male here. And getting close to the end of that fisher season, ends on the 15th, so I had to get him skinned. And Fishers and Bobcat, we have to bring them in and get the animal registered at the DNR office within 3 days of the season. Got him in and got this seal on him. It records the location you caught him, the date, whether it was a male or female. They also retain the skull of the animal. They send it into the lab for analysis, getting the age and date and so on. Hopefully this guy here is going to be worth some money on the market. I'm not sure what they are. This particular fisher, we got him in a typical fisher set. We used I had a conibear set in a box using some beaver for bait, and happened to come along there and got in here, and usually the conibears get them right behind the head, make a nice catch on the animal. So they're really effective for fisher. Again, you can use a foothold trap, whatever seems to work the best, but in the winter, the conibears are so much more efficient. When you skin these animals out, like all other long-haired furs, you place them on the board with the fur on the inside for approximately 8 hours, just to get the animal, get the fur partly dry, the skin part partly dry. Then you have to turn them and replace them on the board again, and you market them with the fur on the outside. All long-haired furs is done in the same fashion. Again, this is a nice male. Typically on the fur market, the females are a little smaller, but they tend to run a little darker. So the females tend to have a little more value, even though they're smaller because of the darker fur. They are a beautiful animal. Squirrel eaters get up in the trees, and you can see there, they get after them porcupines. They're one of the few animals that can successfully manage porcupines, and they do get a lot of quills in them, but for some reason the quills don't seem to bother them. But almost every fisher you catch will have some porcupine quills in them. Try to get them out of there because they don't really want them in the market. They get these animals get into the fur market. They go into a drumming process where they're fluffed up. They get looking pretty nice and pretty before they get actually onto the market floor. So when we see these quills in there, we like to get them out of there so that they don't distract from the appearance of the animal. This is a nice bobcat that we picked up in one of our sets. It's probably one of the largest cats I got, certainly one of the longest. Very long-bodied cat. Didn't actually weigh him, but I would have guessed that he probably was around 40-pound cat. When you get around a 40-pound cat, that's a pretty good sized cat. So we're going to go through the process of, we just got him skinned out, and I had him turned with the fur on the outside here. But now we're going to put him on a board and get him ready to dry. So we're going to, first of all, get them turned around, and then we're going to do some flushing on them. If you're going to skin them and freeze the pelt for any length of time, you always want to make sure you freeze them with the fur on the outside. A lot of trappers will catch some animals and freeze them up, freeze the pelts, and then when you get time, you come back and actually put the animals up on the board. So you can see this guy's been eating good. He got a lot of fat on him. Must have had a lot of rabbits in this guy. So we're going to put him on the flushing board. You can see we got fat all the way from the chest area, down in the belly, down in the flanks here, around the front legs. You got to get that fat off that animal before you can dry it. So we're going to go over to the flushing beam here, get him right up on that beam. And I would start up in around the neck area. That's where the fat usually starts. There's not a whole lot of fat until you get around the front legs. You want to try to keep the animal tight, keep the fur tight whenever you're working on them with a knife, because you can cut the pelt easily. So don't have a real sharp knife here. The fat usually comes off of these cats pretty easily. We're just going to kind of work that fat off them here. Take a section and keep working it down. Again, these are valuable fur, so you want to be careful that you don't damage the animal or cut them. Probably the most valuable pelts on the market today are the bobcats. This is usually not the case. Bobcats generally are never this well fed. So he must have been in a good rabbit swamp. The rabbit membrane can sometimes be left on. That's called a saddle. But we want to make sure we get to anything that has fat in it. That won't dry properly, and it'll affect the way the pelt dries. We can pick out a little more if we have any more when we get them on the board. Okay. Now when you put these on the board, what I like to use is an adjustable frame. It has, as you can see, it's got the open inside here, so airflow, and you can adjust the frame for width, for the size of the animal. You can use this kind of a frame for coyotes as well as bobcat. If you use a standard width board, is normally okay for coyotes, but if you get a big bobcat, sometimes you like to be able to get that belly width just a little bit more out there, because the animals are graded by their length, but in the case of cats, they like that wide belly, especially if they got a good spotted cat. So we're going to put him on the frame and see how he fits on here and adjust him up a little bit. Again, all animals, coyotes, fox, whatever you're putting on the board, you want to make sure you get them balanced out. So the ears are on one side, front legs are on one side, and the tail is on the opposite side, so they look nice and balanced. Again, we left a little leg on these. That's a good idea. They kind of like a little more leg on them. We're going to dry those legs individually. We're going to put some blocking in there so they dry nice, because there is a little bit of fur quality in there that they like to use. You want to get that back leg down to one side of that board. Again, these things are all graded electronically sometime when they go over the conveyor belts, because they're grading thousands of them, and they're put into size categories. Then the grades come into play. So once we get that established on here, I'm going to adjust this width a little bit more here. I want to get that width a little more in the bottom here. And by having this adjustable, I can do that. Pull them legs down nice and tight. Tuck them around a little bit in here. Again, we're just using push pins here. Now, sometimes what you have to do here, you got to get that tail out, or the tail area open. When you skin them, you pull the tailbone out, but then you have to split that tail out. So you use a little tool like this. Pull that tail right down to the end there. I like to have a board under here to kind of keep that tail flat, and sometimes with the open stretchers you don't always have that, so a lot of times I'll just put a piece of wood in here, hold that tail out with, get his tail back here where he belongs, and get these legs down nice, and we'll turn them over. There's no real rocket science to this, it's just common sense. You do a few of them, you get the hang of what you're doing. You got them in pretty good shape here. The other thing is we don't need a lower lip on these animals. When you skin them, you can just cut that lower lip right off them. Like to keep them centered nice and looking good. we do is we just roll up some cardboard and you push them right inside those legs so that lets the air get in there, and so they get them dry. You don't want them things to mold or not dry properly. Put one on this side as well, hold them up in there just to get some air going inside that thing to get them dry, because we're going to turn this pelt after about 8 hours. And the next thing you want to do, once you get them all on the board, you want to get them up someplace so you get a good air circulation around them. I like to put them up on a shelf or someplace where I can get them up near the top of my fur shed here, just like that. We get some air movement. I got a fan in here. In about 8 hours, that pelt will dry up. I can come and turn them the other way, and then he's gonna have the fur on the outside, which is the way they're shipped in the market. Well, we got out here this morning and let these pelts dry overnight in a cool barn here, and got to get them ready to turn now. And the thing you got to watch is you don't want to let them over dry. Okay, we got the Bobcat that we put up yesterday, and again he's nice and dry, but he's not too bad. We can still move him here, so hopefully we can get that turned. We'll get them leg dryers out of there, and you see how the legs have dried nicely here now. They got a nice dry appearance to them. That's good, because you don't want that moisture in there, because when we turn them now, there's not too much airflow inside there. You gotta take them off the boards. Once again, just get the pins out. The Bobcat is especially kind of a tough one to turn because they're kind of long and straight. Sometimes coyotes are a little easier because they've got a little wider body on them. I like to get started on the bottom part. Just roll that pelt up as you go here. Grab a hold of it there and work it up. And we get about that far. Then we got to start from the nose. Get that nose turned in, push it down inside. This one's pretty good, just about right. You can still flexible enough to move it and not too overly dry. I've had some already that have been so dry that because I didn't get at them in time. What you have to do is get a warm towel, soak it in hot water, and then take that wet towel and wrap it around that pelt for a while on the outside here for about 10-15 minutes, and that'll moisten up that pelt enough to where you can work it and get it soft again. Then you can get it to soften up enough to turn it. But this one's going to be okay, I think. And then you got to get up inside there. That's why you got to start from the bottom enough to get your arm up in there. And you don't have to be worrying about tearing the pelt because they're pretty tough. I can get my finger into that nose up in there. I'm going to pull. He's coming. You know, it was the easiest thing to do, but I can do it. There he comes. There he comes. So now we get it out here in the position that we want it to be. Everybody wants to see these spots. The wider the belly, the more spots, the higher value they have on the market. Okay, now we're going to get that frame back in there. Again, we do it the same way, pretty much as we did when we put them on before. The front legs are up inside here, which is good. That gives the animal a little puffiness there. Makes it look nice and full around that front end here. Get them snug down into the nose. And keep them straight as you can on there for looks. Get them back pinned on again. Not that it really matters, but I always try to take the ears, if I can, pull the ears forward and pin them a little bit. Again, not that it's going to matter too much in the market, but we just try to keep things looking a little nicer, a little more uniform. Yeah, nice cat. They get bigger than that, but not too much. So after all the hard work of getting the traps out and tromping through the brush and fighting the cold and the snow, you're lucky you get rewarded with a nice cat. It's not the idea of trying to catch as many as you possibly can. I just like to get 1 or 2 a year, and I'm happy with that. It's just the idea that you can catch a nice animal and take care of it properly and get it on the market. It's fun. It's enjoyable. Now here's something that you don't catch every day, but we're allowed to catch. We're allowed to get a badger. We have about a 15-day season in November, and once in a while we run into a badger. They're kind of in the same area as the coyotes, So if we're out trapping coyote, once in a while you'll catch a badger in a coyote trap. They get a nice pelt to them, especially if they're prime. They got a nice long guard hair on them. Years ago, they used to use some of this bristle fur, they call it, along the side here for the old-fashioned shaving brushes. Back in the old days, they used to make the brushes for barber shops and so on, and they used to use the badger fur to make them bristles. One thing about these guys here, you can notice the claws. Naturally, they have the claws because they're a digging animal. They can dig a hole faster than a woodchuck, I guess. So basically, that's what they are. They're a predator that feeds on woodchucks and squirrels, and they'll follow them right in the ground, especially in sandy ground. They can make some awful big holes. So their front claws are their digging tools, as you can see. One of the rare things you get on the trap line, but again, they always got a few surprises out there.
A quick reminder, on February 1st, the UP Trappers will hold their annual Trappers Workshop at the Community Club in Hermansville from 9 to 5 Central. For more information, visit their website at uptrappers.com. As Upers, we specialize in making do with what we've got, and we've got firewood. You'd be hard-pressed to find a backyard that isn't adorned with a tarp-covered pile of wood. Whether we realize it or not, it's just one of the ways we live off the land here in the Upper Peninsula. Here's some insight on heating with wood from MSU Extension agent Bill Cook.
You know, you can talk about which wood to burn, and you can talk about how to stack it and season it, and you can talk about different wood stoves and furnaces and chimneys, and all that's important if you're going to be a steady wood burner. And incidentally, firewood is the cheapest way to go, hands down. But there's a caveat to that, and that's, of course, you got to be willing to do some work. Average home burns about 100 million BTUs in a season. Cord of wood will have roughly 15 to 20 million BTUs, so depending on your house and your furnace and your efficiencies, you know, you're going to need about 5-6 cords of wood to heat a good-sized house. I've been burning firewood a long time, and mostly what I try to use, living in the great North Woods like we do, is hard maple. But there's a lot of good wood out there. Anything that comes out of our northern hardwoods, pretty much you burn, and I'm one of those guys where I pretty much burn anything that I find. We've got even some old pieces of willow sitting here that if you dry it, it's a nice fast burning wood for those spring fires or kindling to get things going. But most of the time it's this hard maple, sugar maple. It's a real common pulpwood. A lot of times you can find loggers who can't necessarily sell it to a mill for one reason or another. The smaller size material makes great firewood. So the species doesn't really matter a whole lot, although you'll find a lot of people argue that point, because wood, pound for pound, has the same amount of BTUs, give or take a small percentage. The difference between different kinds of woods, for example, is the volume. Pound for pound, willow and maple have the same number of BTUs, but maple is a lot denser than willow. So you need more willow by volume to get the same pound or the same ton or the same amount of weight as you would with hard maple. So that's why a lot of people will say you get more bang for your buck with a dense hardwood, a sugar maple or an oak or something along those lines, than you will with willow. But that doesn't mean you can't burn, and that's basically true. There are more BTUs in this piece of wood than there are in this piece of wood, even though they're about the same size. But that's simply because this is denser. But you can burn in a wood stove or a furnace just about anything, as long as you dry it and season it correctly. The moisture content is going to significantly reduce the amount of BTUs that go into your house, because a wet piece of wood is going to burn slower. The heat in the furnace is going to have to drive off that moisture, that water, before it begins to burn the wood. So you're taking a lot of heat and essentially evaporating water instead of using it to heat your house. So dry wood, as dry as you can get it, is good. If you can get wood down to 20% moisture, that's basically air-dried wood, 20%, a little less than 20%. If you've got that, you can burn almost anything. Now there are some woods that you can burn wet because of the wood structure. They carry less water. Ash is notorious for that, at least white ash. You can burn it a little moister than some species. Sugar maple, on the other hand, doesn't burn very well when it's wet, and neither does oak and aspen and willow, and some of those don't burn at all. Some folks will say you can't burn or shouldn't burn conifers like jack pine or balsam fir or tamarack. Well, you can. They do have some extra chemicals in them, and it's even more important to get those well dried and seasoned because a lot of those chemicals will be driven off during the drying process. But even so, when you do burn them, they are going to put more chemicals into your chimney flue shaft, and that'll have to be cleaned out. If you burn that stuff wet, you're going to get more and more of those accumulations, and that's when you get the possibility of chimney fires. That crud in there, some people call it creosote, which isn't quite right, but the creosote that's in there catches fire. It's very hot, and so your attic starts on fire, your wall, and then disaster strikes. There are a lot of people who do cut wood just before they burn it, and you can't do that. Dead wood, if you cut it, the upper part of the wood is actually drier than the bottom part, but the first 8 to 10 feet of that wood still can conduct water during the growing season, especially the last couple of feet. The butt end of that log or that standing dead tree is still wet. And I would still recommend air drying those to get the most efficiency out of the wood in your furnace or the stove that you're using. You want to keep the house warm and you want to burn the least amount of wood as possible and minimize the labor that's involved. Let that nice July, August air dry that wood out for you, and that's going to be the trick right there. And I don't stack my wood like this when it's drying in the season. This is my winter stacking. It's pretty tight. I try to fit in as much into the garage as possible. But when I air dry it, I'll stack it real loosely, 2 or 3 at a time, crosswise, to allow lots of air movement in there to dry that wood out. You can see there's lots of air movement through here. It'll move through the pile. The breezes will move through, and then when the sun beats, I pull off the tarps in the summer, and I don't mind it raining on it during the summer because that's just wood water that's on top of the wood, and it'll actually dry out pretty quickly. As long as that air can move through it, it'll be dry. Of course, most of the time, end of July and August, we don't get much rain anyway. And you get those nice temperatures, 75, 80, 85 degrees. It'll drive most of the moisture out that air is going to drive out. But then come Labor Day or soon after that, I'll cover it all up and keep the fall rains off, and then we're all set to go.
That's it for this week. Keep the wood fire going, stay warm, and we'll see you next week right here on Discovering.